Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for milestone episode 150 of the Freight 360 podcast. Did you realize that we were up to 150 already, Ben?
I did not, but that's
I was putting the notes together this week, and I had to highlight the 150 on our little show notes document because I was like, that's kind of a milestone. I remember when we hit 100, I think we had Trey on, right? It was just about a year ago.
Yep.
Yeah, man. Good stuff. Come a long way for sure. So we're going to have a good episode today, though. This is a topic that we get asked a lot. People, how do I cold call? What do I say? What questions do I ask? So that's what today's episode is going to be all about. The cold calling questions to ask shippers as a freight broker. We'll get into that in a little bit here. But first, if you're brand new here, you caught a great milestone, monumental episode with great content. Make sure to check out all the other content. Share us with your friends. Leave those reviews. We haven't had a written review in a few months here. I was trying to look at iTunes yesterday and got a lot of 5 stars, but no one feels like typing anymore. So that's okay.
I will tell you, though, on the other note, we've gotten a lot more activity on the YouTube channel. So keep the questions and the comments coming. This is where we get a lot of our questions that we're going to actually answer and the topics for the show, right? So they aren't just being out there where, we even just answer them one-on-one, like we aggregate those. In fact, we were discussing that this last week, we're going to start doing some YouTube shorts where we're going to do the minute or minute and a half videos. And we're going to answer questions like this, the ones that are submitted to the channel or submitted through info@freight360 through our website, or even just emailing us anywhere, but we're getting questions, right? We're going to start putting out some short videos and just directly answering them.
Facebook group as well, the Freight Brokers and Carriers group on Facebook. You'll know it's ours because there's like 44 or 45,000 people in there, and it says Freight 360 at the top. Actually, today's questions all came from the Facebook group. We've had a lot of really good stuff coming in there, so keep it up. Well, let's do a little sports recap here. I just want to talk about how bad the Red Sox are right now. If anyone saw any news headlines in sports, you probably saw the Red Sox set records by losing 28-5. It was against a
football
Blue
game.
Jays. It was so bad. It was so bad. It was like the most runs they ever allowed in like modern history as a franchise. I think Toronto's like highest scoring game in modern franchise history, and it's up there for like all time, one of the highest scoring games ever in baseball history. Not the high. I think there was like someone scored 29 or 30 points, but 28-5.
What happened?
And what I thought was funny is so Tom Brady, he was off a little bit because he tweeted a joke at, I think it was one of the other.
It's the top one, by the way. It's the top one. I just Googled it. Most runs scored in a game in MLB history. Oh, I'm sorry. The Red Sox actually have it. Red Sox versus the Browns, 29-4 was the ultimate.
That's worst. A little redeeming fact right there.
Yeah, they had the other record, 29-4. So they did a little better than the absolute worst.
Tom Brady tweeted, I think it was at like Julian Edelman or something like that, like, this is going to make a hell of a story. Like he was referencing the 28-3 halftime score in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, the Red Sox did not come back. They just continued to lose. So, but yeah, good stuff. What else is going on in sports, man? I know the Bills started their
training camp.
In the last couple of days. A lot of pretty much NFL teams all around are doing that. So we're getting close.
Yeah, Steelers.
Man. A few weeks until preseason.
Steelers kicked it off up at St. Vincent. We used to go up there every summer to go watch them play. It's at the college just outside of Pittsburgh. The whole team goes and stays at that college. They said there's like, I think 4 other NFL teams. The only 2 that I remembered them were like Green Bay does this and the Cowboys do this, where they go to another city in another area where they have like training
camp.
Bills
do too. Bills play in Rochester at a college out there. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I mean, big thing. But that's pretty much about it. Tony Finau won the 3M last weekend.
Nice.
I didn't watch much of it.
Well, good stuff. Let's give a shout out to our friends over at DAT before we get into the content today.
Taking the guesswork out of freight with DAT. The DAT Load Board Network is the largest on-demand freight marketplace in North America, connecting freight brokers with available capacity on any lane. Grow your business with tools that allow you to find new business partners, and you can quickly qualify and onboard new carriers. With the industry's leading freight rate data, you can make clear and confident pricing decisions. Check out the show notes for a link for DAT Power, Express, or Trucker's Edge. Get you a free month off and help support us over at Freight 360.
Absolutely. All right. So today's topic, the questions to ask when you're cold calling. So I want to start this off by explaining. Well, we already know why we're doing this topic because it's highly demanded, but I want to talk about why it's important to understand having good questions to ask on a call, right? So a couple of things that we've stressed before is you should do, when you're prospecting, you should not be pitching yourself, right? You should be gathering information, and by asking good questions, you're going to uncover a lot of things. So like you've used the saying, like, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionately. Right? It should be spent listening to your prospects or your potential customers answer questions about a whole bunch of different things. We're going to go through some categories of questions and actually specific questions to ask in this topic or today's episode. But it's really important because if you come across as that like salesy, I'm pitching you on something kind of thing, it's very easy to pick up on that if you're on the other end of the phone. So a good thing about any good sale that you've ever been the customer in, right? The salesperson does a really, really good job at making you feel valued and important, right? Because they're asking you things that are personal to you. Like if you're buying a car, they're going to ask you like, do you have kids, and what, do you travel? Like, stuff like that. So it's just really good in general. I just want to preface with that good question asking is going to be key here. And it's not just the actual words that you say, it's how you say them too, your enthusiasm, if you're smiling on the other end of the phone, if you're standing up, if you're in the mindset versus just monotone. So those are just kind of some basics there.
And I think those both are enormous. They're way more important, I think, even than kind of the questions you're going to ask. And I really mean this. In fact, working with a new client on the one-on-one basis, Andre said, go to truckers. We were talking about this in a call last week. His training before he became a freight broker was in musician. So singing, playing instruments, being in classical, right? So he spent years tuning his ear to being able to pick up on these things. So it really didn't surprise me when he ended up becoming like the top salesperson in their company. And this is exactly what we're talking about. It's people rarely remember what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel, right? And
yes.
To your point, right, when you are managing how you're speaking and that energy, it is often way more valuable than what you're asking. To me, right, the hardest part of doing this job, cold calling, for me was always the days where you don't feel like doing it. The days where whatever, you didn't have enough sleep, maybe your kid was up, you're sick, you don't feel good, you had a car accident on the way to work, it took you an hour and a half, those days, right? Because those days, it is much harder to be able to bring up the energy up to here, right? To be able to talk like this and to be able to be excited and to be able to get them excited. And when you're down, that's difficult. And I would say that is by far the heaviest lift in actually achieving your goal of bringing on customers. It's bringing the energy, right? It's getting them to want to be able to talk to you and letting them feel like you're not bringing them down and feeling like they just got off the phone with somebody that sucked all of their energy out, right? Like that's the takeaway.
For sure. Absolutely. So a lot of this content, we've talked about a lot of these questions before, and I wrote a blog several years ago that went through a series of questions that you should be asking, and we're going to elaborate on that today. But a lot of this is nothing new here. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We just we're repackaging content that we've already discussed in different various forms. So kind of the different categories of questions that I have here, and these are generalized, and then we'll break down the different ones. But questions about the actual product or commodity, questions about who the decision maker is and what they do inside of that company, questions about the lanes or equipment type required for these shipments, volumes, like so how much and how often are they shipping, the time, so facility times and lead times and how urgent this stuff is. So I've kind of generalized all these, but I want to start off with understanding the product or commodity. And I'll first, say that you should know what the product is or what the commodity is that they ship. But there are a lot of other questions that you want to uncover when you're talking to your prospects to better understand the commodity. So you're not going to call a manufacturing company and say, hey, this is Nate over at ABC Logistics. What do you guys make? You know what I mean? You should know. You should have done a little bit of research.
What are you guys doing over there, huh?
Yeah,
and how can we work together?
Like, hey, ABC Steel, what do you guys make? Do you guys make steel by any chance? No. So you should understand what their commodity is. But some of the things that, and I made some notes here, but you want to figure out what is the value of that commodity. Is it, and reason being, is a standard carrier's cargo policy going to cover it, or is there a special requirement there? Also, what kind of a value is it to their customer, right? Is it something that if they don't have this part on time, they're going to shut down production? Is it something that if it shows up late or damaged will have a huge impact? Or is it something that, maybe it's just a, run of the mill, just a widget that they need and they just have a stock of, it's one of those things you have to understand how is their product or commodity used by their customers and what kind of impacts does it have? Because you can have way different ends of the spectrum in this kind of stuff, from an engine part that's super important to lumber it's lumber,
Well, let's go through an example. Let's go through one, and I'll just go through the one that you just threw out there, right? So we'll go through steel, and we'll go through a coil, right? Because a coil in and of itself also kind of feels like, what's the difference between shipping this coil versus another steel coil, right? And I'll just give you one example from one of my customers from a few years ago, right? We shipped a lot of coils for Alcoa, the big aluminum producers, right? Now, I'll give you two different instances. So asking the customer, hey, where are we shipping this to? And honestly, like, what is it used for? How early do they need it? Is this a real strict receiving appointment? What happens if they don't get it right? So those are some of the questions I'm asking throughout a conversation. And here's what we determined. Their coils were vastly different than each other. And I'll give you two examples. One was going to the Coors Brewing Company out in, it was literally out in, I think it was in Colorado.
Yeah.
So anyway, they were coming out of like Tennessee.
Colorado.
So from Tennessee out to Colorado, right? Now, these coils that make beer cans are very, very thin gauge, right? Think about a beer can. If you flick it, you will dent it, right? Now, the other coils that they ship to other things, right? Thicker gauge. In fact, those coils were used oftentimes to build appliances. Think a washer. If you flick a washer, is it going to dent that piece of steel? No. And again, steel is different than aluminum. But again, just for example's sake, right? Now, one coil, the very thin gauge, we found out was one, had to be there on time. Because again, just the way that receiver functions, they need them coming in every day, or they don't have enough inventory to put through their steel mill or their pressing to make beer cans, right? Now, what we also learned was when you secured those coils on a truck, they needed to be completely different than normal coils. So in this case, they needed to have bubble wrap, oftentimes like sheets wrapped around them, and then cardboard, and then tarped. And here's why. And here's what we found out by talking to them, asking other questions. Hey, what has happened in the past? Have you had claims on these? What have the issues been when shipping them? And what we found out was when they just tarp them like a normal coil, even like hail, right, coming down out of the sky, unpredictable, or road debris getting kicked up off the ground would hit the tarp, but the coil was so thin gauge that a few of those rocks would put a nick in that coil. Well, guess what? When you've got a coil that is that thin, a nick, they said, that was like, 3/8 of an inch, like a very small dent, they said ruined like hundreds of yards of this coil, of this aluminum.
Yeah.
Because you can't put it through the machine, and it went so deep into it, even like this minuscule thing. And they sent us pictures. They said, these have the highest claims of anything we ship as a company. All of Alcoa, like this customer, this coil, nobody wants them. The truck drivers don't want to take them because they're such high claim. So it was a great time to find a unique solution to it. We found other places that could supply the things that the drivers could pick up to make sure they were covered. We made sure the shipper had plenty of what they need to make sure these were secured correctly. We made sure the drivers sent pictures. We made sure that if we were aware of weather, that they would pull under an underpass if there was hail coming down. And there were some other precautions we took. But guess what? They came at a premium. The truckers were willing to do it because we paid them a premium. We charged a little more to our customers to reduce their claim percentage. Yes, the cost went up, but the cost still stayed below their claim percentage. So overall, they saved money. Now, on the other side, it didn't really matter. Ship them, throw tarps on them, coil racks, out of the sky, out of the side. It really didn't make a difference. They weren't the same as this. But it's a very good example of how the same commodity can be treated differently. You can make more money on them. And you have like a moat to build around your business, right? Just like a castle. It's very hard for somebody to come and take my business from me because the likelihood that my shipper is going to believe that another broker or carrier is going to be able to do what I am doing now is very slim. So now I've protected my business as well. So these questions don't always just get you more business. They can help you protect the business you have.
Yeah. So like, I think of another example too, is like anything in the reefer world, right? You got to think about, like for example, let's take a look at some kind of like citrus or produce, right? You might have some that's going to a distribution center that has cold storage in it, or you might have some that's going to a farmer's market that has to stay at a certain temperature inside the trailer until it's unloaded and used right away. And some of these produce runs, if you get to a distribution center 12 hours late, what do you do? But if you get to Hunts Point in the Bronx 12 hours late and they don't have stock to sell at a farmer's market, it's a very, very big difference there. Same thing with anything in the refrigerated or temperature controlled space. What does it have to be? What temperature does it have to be held at? And do they want it on continuous or is it cycling? And how soon before before a truck shows up, do they expect that reefer unit to be at its set temperature? So, some
That's
of this
a
stuff,
big one too.
If it's 100 degrees outside in the middle of summertime and you're trying to get something at like frozen, right? It takes a lot longer than it would in March to get that reefer unit down to its proper temperature. So these are the questions you can ask about the commodity and, past claims and issues that they've had. You'll uncover a lot of information about this customer and their pain points, and you're clearly adding value because you're asking questions that someone else probably didn't ask them before.
And I'll give like some higher level stuff you could do with these, right? Because these are always the ones you want to go at first, right? I just did a video on this. I think it'll be out next week. But you're asking operational questions, right? So operationally, like you said, hey, do we need to pre-cool the reefer? What does the temperature need to be at? Okay, we get this information. Now you want to ask a challenge question. Hey, how often do your carriers actually show up and do this? Is it pretty consistent? Out of the 10 loads you're telling me you ship a day, how many show up with the correct temperature when they arrive? And you find out maybe 1 or 2 doesn't on a daily basis. Maybe 1 doesn't, maybe 10% doesn't. Now we're going to ask consequence questions to be able to make this felt by them, right? This is the feeling. Hey, Jim, tell me, when a guy shows up and doesn't have his trailer pre-cooled, what does that do to your loading dock? Does that back up your schedule? Does the guy sit in the parking lot until his temperature reaches this? What happens if you put the product in there before it's pre-cooled? What does that do to the product, right? And even though you might know that, like, yes, if you take something out of your refrigerator and put it in a hot garage, it's probably not going to be good for the food. You want them to be able to tell you this. You want them to be able to tell you about the guy that showed up that didn't do this and ended up screwing up their entire loading schedule or causing an issue with his warehouse that's now he's getting screamed at for it, right? That's how you're getting them to feel the pain of when the things they're telling you that need to be done aren't being done by the people you're competing with, right? That's how you challenge them, make them feel the consequence before you can get to the natural conclusion of, well, hey, if this is happening that much, is there any reason why we can't run a few of these and prevent this for you? Right? Like that's your sales cycle. That's the close.
Yep. Absolutely. Because remember, somebody before you has messed something up at just about every shipper out there. So they're likely going to have some kind of a story to tell you that can give you insight into what you need to be focusing on to succeed with them. So I want to move on to some decision maker type questions. And this encompasses quite a bit here. So I think the most obvious one is, who is actually going to make the decision to bring you guys on as a new broker? Because I've heard horror stories from people that they're like, they've spent so much time trying to close the wrong person that didn't actually make the decision. It's like, and they get to the end, they're like, all right, cool. What do we do next? And they're like, oh, well, I don't actually do any onboarding.
The gym.
That's my boss or whatever. So you gotta figure out who is that decision maker that's actually going to get you in the system to, work on some, like, can they actually tender you some spot loads to work on? Or if you're trying to get into a bid cycle or some kind of a bid process, who is the one that's actually going to be sending you out the link or whatever it is to start the actual bid process there? Because decision makers are there for a reason, right? And our goal, and gatekeepers are there for a reason too. So you want to make sure you get past the gatekeeper and get to the decision maker. So that's kind of like the obvious one there.
Well, let's break down.
Yes.
Let's break it down Barney style, right? In regards to like who does what where, right? Oftentimes at a shipper, right? To your point, you're going to have probably sometimes three different levels of hierarchy, right? Gatekeeper, person screening the people coming in through the phone systems, right? You're usually going to have somebody else that actually tenders the loads and actually sends the loads to you, right? The person you would be working with on a day-to-day basis, right? Load tender, dispatch, load planner, right? But oftentimes, and definitely in the mid-sized to bigger companies, you will have a third person, which is the guy who's in procurement, right? And he's the guy that decides who gets to be approved as a vendor, right?
Yep.
They're the ones that are evaluating vendors and determining whether or not a company will work with their company. They're not the ones sending the loads out every day, but they are the one that are going to determine whether or not you will be an approved carrier or vendor for them.
Yeah. So, and typically those, and like you said, the bigger the company, the more likely you'll have somebody like that. And they could be like your director of transportation or procurement. They can go by a whole bunch of titles, but you're right. They're not the day-to-day one tendering it out, but they are likely part of the initial contract process if the customer has requirements that they need you to hit. And also that person is usually, they're under the gun for cost overall when it comes to transportation, freight and freight spend, claims, on time, all the metrics and KPIs that you would see that will rate and rank a carrier in an annual bid cycle. That's what that person is usually measured against. Whereas the person tendering the loads, their job is to make that person happy, right? Make that boss happy, get trucks in and out on time, and keep costs to whatever reasonable budgeted amount that they've got in mind. So it's really good to understand that. And you can ask those questions too. And one of the things I like is when you're talking to that person that tenders freight, right? You can ask things like, hey, I know obviously everyone takes time off and gets sick. Like who's your backup or who takes over for you when you're not in for whatever reason? Because you always want to know more than just one person in the organization for a variety of reasons, right? If they're out, if they leave that company, if they get promoted, right? A whole bunch of things like that.
There's a saying, it's like one up, one over, and one down. Whoever you're working with, you should know the person above them, next to them on either side, and the person, that maybe reports to them so that you can widen that circle, right?
Yeah.
But you touched on something that's really worth reiterating, and I think pointing out. They all have different pain points. They have different jobs, and they have different things that they're going to need to make them better at their job. The guy in procurement typically reports about money, about all transportation. Remember, if they are not a 3PL or a 4PL or like an LTL company and their business isn't shipping, they don't care about shipping. Shipping is a necessary expense to get their product to their customers. They're not in the shipping business. So they're looking at what are they doing? How much do they make on widgets? And how much of that money goes to pay to get the widgets to their customer? So procurements definitely care about cost. And they also usually care about customer satisfaction, how often their customers are getting the things when they said they would get them, right? Now, your load planner, they're the ones dealing with trucks every day. So they're the ones feeling the stress of a fallout. They're the one that feel the stress of waiting to recover a load, where everybody else in the company might not see the stress that happens when trucks don't show up or are late or whatever happens, right? That's their pain. That's where they live, right? So it isn't uncommon for you to be able to build rapport and create value with a load planner much easier than procurement. You might have, like you said, and I've had this, I've been talking to people for months sometimes, and I thought they were the load decision, the decision maker, found out, they were to tender the loads, but they couldn't approve me. And I needed to wait another 6 months because the only time that company ever approved vendors was once a year. And that isn't something that the person I talked to could change or influence, right? So again, you want to be able to find these things out as soon as possible so that you're not spinning your wheels, trying to build a relationship with somebody that might not have the ability to even give you what you're trying to get from them.
And I want to add to this too. So understanding that structure, think about this. Some of these bigger companies, and I ran into this with a freight forwarder years back, where as long as you were in at their corporate level, you could literally just go to any branch you wanted to and get access to any of their freight on the spot market. Any of it. The hard part, though, was getting in the door through their corporate, which was a ridiculously long process. But that's why it's so important to understand this, because you could do a lot of the hard work up front, and then it creates a big barrier to entry. So you've got less competition once you get yourself in the door. So to understand how the whole organization is structured is big, and who does what their job is, what their pain points are, who's actually awarding business in a bid cycle, who's tendering freight out on a day-to-day basis, things like that. So, and then also I want to just add in here, literally how are loads tendered? Is it, are you going to be, if you're working on their spot freight, is it you and 3 other folks that day that are all just trying to come back with the first truck at a reasonable price? Or, is it the kind of freight where they're going to give you a couple days to get something covered at a price point that they have in mind, and if you can't, they're going to go to somebody else? How does that all look, and how does that work? You should understand that process, because every company is going to have a little bit of a different SOP on how they operate.
And you're going to fit into it differently, right? With different SOPs, you're going to have to provide value at different areas, right? They're not always the same thing. They always will tell you it's the same thing. I want better service at lower cost, right? That's the front line of every single one. That's your first hurdle, right? So yeah, there are different strategies, but the way I've always kind of looked at it is it's more like politics. You want as many advocates on the other side saying that they think you should be onboarded, right? So if Jimmy, you've been talking to him for a couple of weeks and you've got a good rapport, find out who else has Jimmy's job. Try to start talking with them too, right? Because if ultimately both of their bosses hears from a lot of the people that report to him that they've been hearing good things about you, you're way more likely to be able to get approved by, the procurement decision maker. The more people you have on your side telling them good things and saying that, hey, they want to give you a shot, the more likely you're going to be able to move that over the goal line, right?
Absolutely. Yep. It was actually, so just to I want to go back to another story I had. A local customer, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago, we started doing some business with them, and then we did a facility tour. So it was the guy that tendered the freight and then his boss, who was like the director of transportation or whatever his title was. And we went to their facility and we saw a lot of other pain points in their logistics and supply chain realm, such as like lack of storage space on site. And we uncovered the need for like warehousing for them. So we ended up being able to set up warehousing for some of their additional or their overage in stock that they had, that then we got to also do, broker the actual shipment of stuff to the warehouse, and then from the warehouse back to their facility. So like, it was a great way to add additional little business in there, just because we figured out who was who and what their pain points were. Because like I said, the big boss's pain points are not the same as the traffic manager's pain points. So it's good stuff. All right, I want to move on to lanes and equipment. So literally, you want to find out, where are they shipping? How often are they shipping? What kind of equipment, PPE, special, straps, tarps, pipe stakes, you name it, dunnage, right? What kind of all that, what about all that goes into their normal operation? And it's really, really important to understand this stuff, because when there's a misunderstanding or a broker fails to get details on some of this stuff, that's where they can quickly lose their credibility, right? They could send the wrong equipment in there, or send a driver in that's missing certain equipment, or
Hey, stop there for 1 second, because I want to point out something before we go further, right? And this came up a lot in coaching over the past week or two. You will save yourself a tremendous amount of time by just doing the simple thing, asking what equipment they can load, not just what one they're telling you, right? So when they go, hey, I need a whatever 53 dry or whatever, ask a follow-up question. Hey, can this load on a reefer? Can this load maybe in a Conestoga, right? Just asking these questions allows you to make it so much easier for you to cover later, and to your point, avoid some issue, right? And just getting in the habit of always asking. If they tell you something, make sure you're asking. If it's open deck, hey, if this is a flatbed, can it load on a step deck? Can it load on a double drop? How long is it? Are you able to load other equipment? And if you can't, what are the reasons to? Because again, having more options is just going to make it easier for you to actually get a truck at a margin that works for you too.
Yes. I want to add in there too. I've seen this actually quite a bit recently, is somebody that's moving partials. So whether it's flatbed or enclosed in a van, oftentimes you've got alternative options for those partials, right? It could potentially go LTL. It could potentially go on a hot shot. It could go in a straight truck, box truck, sprinter van, maybe. You never know. I mean, there's all kinds of other stuff in here. Just because they're used to shipping it one way doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. And these kind of questions will uncover that for you. You might even talk to somebody that they're like, you know what? I never thought about that. And you guys can solve that problem together and figure out if you've got a better solution for them. So
100%. And that's the most recent video I just edited, which is LTL versus partial versus full truckload. And again, you have access to doing all of these. It doesn't cost you any more money. You're just providing different levels of service and different options, right? LTL, lower price, don't have a lot of visibility, don't really know when it's going to get there. In the middle, partial option, a little bit higher price, more visibility, not guaranteed delivery, but closer. Full truckload, dedicated, highest cost, but you know exactly where it is. It has the highest control and you have the least risk, right? Somewhere in there, you can move things back and forth. They're not set in stone.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Some of this stuff, like with partials, right? When you ask this stuff, like if they want to go full truckload and you think it might be able to get partialed out, you need to verify with them if they're okay with that before you do. Because I've seen instances where a driver will intentionally take two partials, knowing that they can't make both. They can't make the delivery times perfectly, and then they'll just mysteriously have a breakdown, which causes them to be late to one of the deliveries because they knew they weren't going to make it in the first place. And oh, by the way, they never turned their GPS on, so you're just going to you're going by their word that, oh yeah, they're broken down over here at this place when they really aren't. So yeah, you got to make sure, because again, this time sensitive, urgent stuff, if you miss a delivery and it has to wait till the next day, it's going to piss your customer off. So,
and you're right. There's also a lot of commodities you can't load with other commodities. Just the top one that comes to my mind is kosher food. Where you literally can't load it with some other foods for, reasons. There are other things that you can't. So definitely make sure you verify that before you just go and partial it out, because I've definitely seen people lose customers trying to make a couple extra $100 by loading some more cargo. And I've also seen drivers do this without a broker's knowledge. And that's where they just vanish. And all of a sudden, it just always seems to happen when you're shipping a 10 or 15,000 pound dedicated load, right? And they got all this empty space, and all of a sudden you can't hear from the guy for 2-3 days. Well, oftentimes the driver's picking up another load on the way, making a couple extra $100, couple thousand, and just, sorry, I'm a couple days late. I don't know what happened. It's my radiator or whatever.
Yep. So I want to expand this into kind of the volume of shipment too, because not just the equipment and the lanes, but how often are they moving? Is it daily freight? And we've kind of used that number, 20 loads a month, right? That if you're at 20 loads a month or more, a customer is likely going to benefit from brokerage services, right?
20 a week.
20 a week is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. All right.
20 to 25 a week. I feel like around, and because that's about the same number for one broker to be able to do without needing an assistant. Usually one person can cover around 4 to 5 loads a day, but right around there, you've got no more bandwidth. You're working 8 to 10 hours. You probably need somebody. And that's usually where a load planner then needs a broker, because they need the flexibility when trucks don't show up. But again, it's kind of like a loose metric to just get an idea. But you're right. Okay. And the other thing is, load volume has an inverse relationship with cost. And everything else, when you do more of something, it usually gets cheaper. In this world, if you are shipping 5 truckloads down the same lane, every truck gets harder to get. And if you're shipping 10 down the same lane, the 9th and 10 cost more than the 1st and 2nd. So you actually have the opposite thing happening.
You're changing the market within your own lane on your own customer. Yep. That's crazy. Also too is inbound versus outbound, right? Are they controlling just outbound freight? Do they control any inbound freight? How does it match up? Are they doing a mix of both? Is it just one or the other? Because if they are controlling their inbound and their outbound, you can literally piggyback off of your own customer, get more of their business, right? That you may not have thought about.
And that's a great way to just look at this, right? The visual that I always kind of have in my head is anything that's going out of a building had to get in there in the first place. Maybe it's a raw material. Maybe it's not the same looking commodity like plastic, comes in beads or whatever, and it goes out as whatever, a toy truck. But something's getting shipped in and someone's controlling it, or at the very least the receiving. They may or may not have issues and may or may not need some additional help there too. All the same.
Yep. Think about your beer example, right? It goes out as beer, but it comes in as steel, barley, hops, all that stuff. Last thing in this section too is, what are they seeing for, like, if they have contract business, how often are they seeing stuff get kicked back and fall into their spot market? Or maybe it's not kicked back or, rejected by a driver or broker, but maybe they just have one-off freight that hits the spot market that was unplanned for originally. And you want to understand how that looks, because if you're not going to hop in and start with contract business right away, right? You're going to prove some value in their spot market business with the goal to get to their contract business down the road. So you want to understand, what do you have the ability to get your hands on as a new broker working with them, versus what is the golden egg down the road that you want to get your hands on, and what does that look like overall? I think that understanding the spot's going to be extremely huge for you, because if they're telling you that, hey, literally like 30% of our loads are getting kicked back for like out of every single load, that's huge. And we did see that like in the last year or two. But I would say, typically the 10% or so tends to be what we see the metric for outbound tender rejection. And I think that's from the Freight Waves metrics, but you need to understand this. You have brokers and carriers out there that are notorious for bidding on things that they know they can't cover. They're going to kick back anyway.
Yes.
So,
and again, right, keep in mind, one of my favorite analogies for this is, for anyone new to the industry, it's like a temp position versus a full-time position, right? You're really interviewing kind of for a temp position. Hey, you need some help here or there? I'll come in and sweep the floor. Oh, I'll come in and help with this. Oh, I'll come in and do this. I'll do whatever you need to prove to you that I'm the kind of worker you would want on your team. Once you've done that for a period of time, they go, hey, this guy shows up. This guy goes above and beyond. They're over-servicing it. Like, let's give him a little more responsibility. So you get a couple more loads. Okay, performing well here. Let's look at giving him some consistent loads, maybe the same ones he's doing well every week. There's your next step. Your final step is, once you've done that enough that they've trust you and you've built up enough of a reputation with them and this business that they go, hey, let's give them some more on a consistent basis, because we know they're not going to drop the ball on us. And that's the curve of the sales process. In our world, it's very different than other industries. In most industries, you find a customer, you sell them, you find the next customer. In ours, you find one of two people, you've got to get onboarded, then you've got to build rapport with the guy sending you the freight, then you've got to go through this process of showing them that you're going to do what you say you're going to do over a long enough period that they trust you to your point, give you the golden egg, give you what we're trying to get to, right?
Yep. And I want to add in there too a question. We didn't have this one written down, but the question being, is there anything urgent right now you're trying to get out the door that I can help work on for you, right? Because oftentimes if there's an immediate pain point and it's, hey, I've had 2 people now kick this load back to me, like, if you can come in and save the day for them, that's going to be a massive win for you right there. So
every one of my customers started with that, I think. Like, everyone started with a load that like they couldn't get moved, or a lane that nobody wanted to work. And it's like, when you can go and do those and show them, like, that's the best way to get onboarded, right? Like, and their days, right, they suck. You're working 6-8 hours to cover maybe one load. It might over 2 days you might spend to just cover a load. And you might only do it for like a 5 or 8% margin where you're barely breaking even. But it shows that you're willing to do those things when necessary. That really shows you're different than the people you're being compared to, right? That's how you go above and beyond. It's not just being the cheapest, and it's not talking about yourself, right? It's finding out what they need right now. And it's like, you almost wish you could ask it directly. Hey, what is your biggest pain in the ass problem right now on your desk that's killing you? What can I help you with? What can I do to make your life easier right now? Is there anything on your desk? That's really what you're trying to determine up front.
Yep. That's huge, man. It's huge. And again, you can use your own style and your own voice to phrase these questions differently. And you can kind of wrap a lot of them together. And the best conversations I've had are the ones that are conversational. They flow very smoothly. It's not rattling through like an interview. You know what I mean? It's conversational back and forth. And a lot of times they'll answer 10 of these questions without you having to ask them, because you're just talking about certain things. And they'll tell you, oh man, you'll never believe what happened with these guys last week, blah, blah, blah. And they'll go on and on and on. You're like, well, I just answered half of what I wanted to figure out here. So the last thing I had on here was just some of the important shipping windows of time. So, understanding very, very clearly, this kind of goes back to knowing the commodity but knowing their facility, what, like, is it 8 to 4 first come first serve, or do they have to have an appointment and call like 48 hours before to verify? Or same thing with the delivery, right? How is the consignees receiving going? Is there expected wait times of 3 to 4 hours during certain times? How is detention handled and paid? How are layovers handled and paid? If something is super, super urgent, how flexible are they when it comes to expediting it or on price or whatever the case might be? Just kind of understanding that the timeline and the actual time on ground and at their facilities and whatnot is going to be very, very big. I've seen a lot of times where there's disputes over, late charges or detention, and it's all because it was never discussed with the broker and their customer. And the carrier oftentimes in these situations has a realistic reason to deserve some kind of accessorial pay, but the broker is not going to get it approved because they never checked the box on that.
It reminded me of another line, right? Assumption is the mother of all F-ups, right? When you're assuming, right, it is by far the biggest mistake you're going to make. Assuming they're first come, first serve.
Assume you make an ass out of you and me, right?
Yep. And the reality is right, like, this is happening every day in almost every brokerage. And I'm guilty of it from time to time, but you want to do your best to make it a habit. Again, just like we were talking about equipment, knowing which shippers are FCFS, which are by appointment, which receivers are on the same end, because it is going to affect which trucks you can put on it, right? You need to know when a guy's empty if you've got a strict loading appointment, because you need to be able to get him there in enough time, right? And on the same hand, like, this is also very common with lots of commodities, produce, getting to grocery stores, Walmart DC, Costco DC, Sam's DCs. A lot of them, you've got to go into a whole other system to schedule a strict appointment time. And if you aren't doing it enough ahead of time and you're waiting till the day of, oftentimes you can't even get a receiving appointment. Now you got to pay a driver a layover for something that you should have known and should have been able to get ahead of, right? Yep. So these are real issues, and they're also opportunities, because if it's something that any one of us could forget, that means our competitors are out there obviously also occasionally making a mistake, not getting something delivered, not knowing of an appointment time, confusing these things. And it's an opportunity for when they drop the ball for you to be able to get your foot in the door.
That's it, man. That's it. Every one of these questions, like you said, it should be, the goal is to learn more about your customer and understand them. But it's also, one of the secondary goals is to be able to expose some of your competition's shortfalls, right? Yes. Find out who's been screwing up this stuff in the past for them. And you can always bring back up, remind your customer, not like you're throwing them under the bus, but remind them of these situations that they've had in the past that you're trying to avoid. So when you talk about, hey, I can get you someone quality and I can get them in there today, you're going to pay a little bit higher than market average for this, though, for these reasons. But don't forget the cost of if this thing shows up damaged or late to your customer, on the receiving end, remember back to, fill in the blank situation. So,
well, and I want to give you like a real example, right? A real example is like, there is a cost for a driver to have a strict appointment versus first come, first serve. Because again, if he has to be there by a specific time, we'll say like 1:00 in the afternoon, he has to be not only empty early enough, but early enough that by the time he drives there, he's there before it to make sure that he doesn't miss it. Now, if it's first come, first serve, he can get there whenever he can, and there's no risk and no cost to him. So there is a cost to using strict appointments versus first come, first serve. And it is honestly justified for a driver to want a little bit more, or for you to have to pay a carrier that is going to have idle time waiting for that appointment, right? As opposed to just showing up and getting loaded when he gets there, right? So these are real reasons why it should cost you a little more for those trucks.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff. Hopefully you guys can take away something from this discussion and incorporate a lot of these questions into your prospecting calls. We've got 3 good questions today, but first I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Lean. Lean Solutions Group is the industry leader in nearshore staffing solutions with offices in South America, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech development, business development, marketing, customer service, and many other positions. To learn more about the vast solutions that Lean has to offer your freight brokerage or agency, visit them online at www.leangroup.com. Again, that's leangroup.com. Our first question, and again, these all come from our Facebook group this week. First question is, what is the best way to establish my business LLC and get my EIN? So I actually thought back to like with Freight 360 when we made it like an official company. You did all the paperwork on it. I think I just signed a couple things, but I'm pretty sure the LLC is done through your state and the EIN is done through the IRS. Am I incorrect?
That is correct. Yeah, businesses are registered through your state. So like ours is registered in Florida through Sunbiz. You go on and again, I know Florida's because I've been here. I haven't been in Pennsylvania a long time, but you go into the state, you can pretty much apply for it and get it done through there. We did also use a law firm to draw up our like operating agreements and things. So like you can get the filing through your state, but you can use LegalZoom. I know, what was the other one I've used?
Law Depot was one that we looked at too, because you can basically get like an articles of organization or whatever it is, partnership agreements, you name it.
I feel like this is one, like if it's going to be more than you in it, maybe don't use a boilerplate, maybe pay an attorney a few $100 to just review one and to change it as needed. You probably won't need one written from scratch. And then the EIN, you're applying through the federal system, and then you get it like a social security number for your business.
Yep, exactly. Good stuff. Next question. How often should I follow up with a prospect? What is the follow-up process, and how long before I give up on that prospect? You want to take this one?
Sure.
We've had varying answers on this. I think I'll start off by saying it depends on how the conversation went, if you even had a conversation.
Yeah. So if you haven't had a conversation, give it a week before you call, at least 5 to 7 days. If you've spoken with them based on what they say, if they're telling you, hey, I might have something for you to look at, call me back at a certain time, that's when you call them back, is the first, right? Now, if you don't know and you've had a decent conversation, you're like, hey, just check back with me. I'm usually a week to 2 weeks to follow back up on a good conversation. But again, it really depends on what's going on in their company. If it seems like they are having lots of issues, or they need help finding trucks now, or they are, a lot of the questions we talked about in this episode, having these issues with other brokers, I will be reaching out to them probably more frequently. Like if it's Tuesday, I'm probably going to call them next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe Thursday. I always vary the time and day. So I'm not calling them the same day and the same time of day. So I spoke to them at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I'll probably pick a different time. And I'm really trying to feel them out to see when is the best time for them to speak to me. And by calling them at different times, that's going to give me that feedback. Now, I give up based on whether or not they aren't qualified. If they aren't shipping 25 loads a week and they aren't using a broker, I'm not calling them back. So I'm giving up when I feel like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. There's not an opportunity for me to keep pursuing. Now, the last thing I want to point out is, we talk about this a lot, the average customer gets closed on your 8th to 12th touch or conversation. That's not your 8th to 10th or 8th to 12th phone call to them. They've picked up the phone and you spoke to them roughly between times 8 and 12, where they will start giving you loads or you'll be approved. And that usually takes, I would say on average, 2 to 3 months of enough. You reached out to them, you spoke, had some good conversation. They're starting to know you, and you've got this back and forth going.
I'll add in there too, giving the only reason I would ever give up on a prospect, it's not a timeline thing. It's just like you said, it's qualifying versus unqualifying them. So like you could have someone tell you to F off and hang up on you 5 times, but I might call them back in 6 months because they're definitely not going to remember you, or there's someone else working in that position. So
yes. And the other thing I would note, I want to point out is, we feel like they're going to remember us as if we're the only person they talk to, because that's the most important thing to us, right? If I call 80 people and speak to 5, I feel like all 5 of them, like their day was the same as mine. Like they went home feeling like talking to me was like the thing that happened that day. The reality is that's the least important thing that happened to their day. It was in the midst of them being busy with everything else. And most times you could call them 48 hours later and they don't remember talking to you. Not because you didn't do a good job, because they've got their own things to deal with, their own problems, their own boss, their own issues.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of people that have called me they assume. So I'm putting myself in the customer's shoes in this example. They've called me and said, hey, it's John, and I'm like, John.
I talked to you 3 days ago.
But you gotta think about it. The amount of people that we all talk to on the phone, it's hard to remember every single person if you've only, talked to them once or twice and it was a while ago. So yes.
Yep.
All right. Last question. How do I get carriers to send their paperwork in faster? I like this question because it's valid. I mean, you can't really make anybody do anything. You can incentivize carriers, though. Hey, the faster we get your paperwork in, the faster you get paid. You could also put, as part of your terms when you tender a load out to a driver, is that you want, you need a BOL sent within 24 hours of delivery or something like that. And you could take a picture on your phone. You can use like the Cam Scanner app. I mean, there's all kinds of free apps out there that they could just take a picture of a BOL and send it into you. Because the reality here is your customer might have a requirement to get a signed BOL in hand within 48 hours. So you need to get that from the customer.
Yep.
But it's not unusual to be able to get a BOL and an invoice within a day or two from a driver. So,
well, and here's the other thing. I always sell it, again, to your point, as a service to them, not as something I need them to do for me, right? Hey, I want to make sure I can get you paid quicker. I want to make sure we don't have any issues getting this later from you later in the week when you get back. Can you just do me a quick favor? Like you said, take a picture, just text that to me real quick. You'd still do what you're going to do, still give it to your dispatcher. He'll still send it to my team in an email when you invoice. But can I get it from my customer? Because then I know you won't have any issues getting paid. And then I can just, alleviate any of these issues for you, right?
Yep.
Sell them on why it's important for them to do it to help them get what they need, which is getting paid quicker without issue. And pretty much every driver's got a phone with a camera on it that they can just shoot that over to you at this point.
Yep. That's it. Good stuff. Good questions. Keep them coming for sure. Keep them coming. What else we got going on?
Well, I mean, kind of we were talking about a little earlier, doing maybe some different stuff with the YouTube channel, trying to get more of these questions out there. I think the more we get from the audience telling us, the things that they're dealing with, the more we can put out content more aligned with it. And I'm really excited about starting to do some more of that stuff because, again, it just seems like it's providing a lot more value, right? Like you and I talked about this last week, talking to half a dozen people some weeks that are finding us, asking us questions through YouTube. And like, that's the whole point of this. This is why we do this, right? It's to be able to add value back to the market, to be able to answer these questions, regardless of whether or not you become a client or end up working with us directly. Like, this is why we do this. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we like doing.
Yep, absolutely. Let's do something random here. What's the craziest thing that happened to you in brokerage in the last week? You got anything? Any crazy stories?
I didn't have anything crazy, but I had an interesting one this morning. This morning, we were talking about it earlier, was had a driver, and this was one of 11 loads, right? This was like the 9th load. Shipper has loaded every one of the same commodity the same, no issue with the first 9 trucks. The guy that loaded yesterday, he went and scaled out, and over his middle axle, he was 36.5. He was 11.2 on the front and 30 on the back. So total, he was less than 80,000. But he is correct. We looked it up. On a single axle, you can only have 20,000 pounds over it. On doubles, you can have 34 over. So
I'll tell you. No, go ahead. I got a story for you on that too.
Yeah, no. So absolutely. This morning, first thing, I got a call late last night. The guy had an issue. He had to go back to the shipper, and the shipper, I mean, he makes some valid points. And the guy he's paying to load at his warehouse is like, look, we've loaded every other truck exactly the same, with the same commodity, and no issue. But to what we talk about, and this is exactly what I said to the shipper. I said, if we knowingly send him out, illegally overweight, right? Like, that's on us. If something happens, they've got the ability to push back and say they're not liable if anything happens. I'm not an attorney, but these are the situations that you want to avoid at all costs. If you know about it and you know it's past the guidelines, don't do it, because it's way riskier than you're going to imagine.
Yep. So I ran into this with an LTL back in the day, because think about LTL it's a bunch of single axles versus your double axle on a tractor trailer regular setup there, because you'll have two like 26 28 foot pup trailers, they're called, where they have a single axle in the back, and then they use a connecting device to connect the two and latch if you look at an LTL, just look at a picture of it, you'll see it's 4 single axles that can each have 20,000 pounds on it. So we would have like floor loaded steel that had to be moved around just the right way, because these guys would scale over 20,000 pounds. And it's really important too, if you have a driver that they're gonna hit a scale and they're not well, a lot of times you'll have scales either on site or right near your customers' locations. But if they're going to hit one of those mandatory scales on the side of the highway, it's really, really important that you get those numbers correct. And that's another question you could be asking your customer too. Like, is there scales on site, or is there like a cat across the street, or whatever the case might be? So,
well, and it's a great example, right? So just in that particular instance, got to pay the driver layover, and my customer had to pay his, his warehouse workers an extra, it was like $400 or $500 to, reshift this load around. So, I mean, all in all, this was $1,000 mistake that could have been avoided in the first place, right? Asking those questions.
Good stuff, man. All right. Any final? What's that?
Anything crazy happened this week on your end?
I was in Nashville all last week. We went through it. Was good though. We had a lot of good stuff. There's like a lot of insurance things we were going through for a big customer that we're trying to onboard with, and it kind of blows my mind that we've talked about this before. But customers that they ask for insurance that like they literally like it
doesn't provide. You just
wonder yourself why. Like why do you need this? But in this case, it was like the parent company was telling the customer like, we're dictating to you that all your providers need to have this. So there's a lot of jumping through hoops and stuff, but got it done. So yeah,
sweet, man.
Good stuff. Any closing thoughts here?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next week, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.